moving on to our last session of the day. It's going to be a panel discussion on the topic ensuring data privacy in the age of big tech domination. Can I please call upon our panelists, Sean Cooper, Director of Public Service Team, Matthew Hogan, founder and CTO of Konversed. He's also our moderator for today, and Subramanya, Jois, CEO and founder of Aurigraph DLT Group.
So we've got a very interesting topic today, ensuring data privacy in the age of big tech domination. And it's actually quite interesting because we've got a diverse skill set up here from all spectrums, actually. And so I think it's going to be quite an interesting experience. So if I could just hand it over to Sean quickly and just give a little bit of background about your background, and then we can go through and we can start this presentation.
Sure. So from my perspective on this panel, I work in the signal intelligence field. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's the raw internet data, big data. So my company actually provides access to that internet telemetry and digital conversations and other things in that realm to, in my space, the public sector space, to governments, and my counterparts into the commercial world. So data privacy is an interesting thing in my world.
Two hats almost.
Yes, absolutely. As a citizen or global citizen, it's can be concerning, but as typically most of our users are law enforcement, intelligence, I want them to find the bad guy.
Right.
So.
Makes sense.
Interesting.
And Subu, can you give us a little bit of your background? Because it's actually very fascinating too, especially what you're doing with blockchain.
Thanks. I'm the founder of Aurigraph DLT. We call it a fourth generation blockchain, or so to say DLT. What we have built is, in a sense, hypersonic DLT, because we are able to demonstrate more than 100,000 transactions per second, where blockchain suffers from scalability, latency issues, and throughput issues. And that's what, and we've been able to do it with a latency, with a sub-second latency typically in the range of under 100 milliseconds that a transaction gets validated and posted onto the ledger. Given that scenario, the type of applications that we've been pursuing is in consumer identity and access management, fintech, healthcare, education.
Can't hear. Is there a... There it is.
Yeah, so it's been in that space, and now we have integrated open data, open banking, essentially, which I think where this topic comes in, where you share consumer data, or the consumer shares his personal data with his consent and with an immutable ledger to capture who, for what purpose it's been shared, and what's the and who with whom it's been shared.
Right. So can you explain just, there's one project that you had in regards to the parking meters that you told us yesterday. Can you just elaborate on that one, just to give a bit of a broader spectrum about what you're doing in regards to a use case?
So in the case of parking, one of the issues that we face today is that we have to, in most places, the minimum parking fare is set to $1 or €1, because that's the minimum transaction that a card can execute in some of the geographies. Secondly, there is no correlation, or you do not capture the vehicle details or the driver details who has parked the car. Now, therefore, the attribution fails, and if both are bound together, then you have a much larger gameplay on data, which can personalize a person's car parking habits also.
Right. Yeah, so with that, like parking meters, where they're basically getting double dipped for like an hour, but with tokenization, you can actually make it so that it's like that hour is paid for, but by multiple people.
Correct. So with a platform like Aurigraph that I work on, we will be looking at micro transactions, which can be, if it is for say $1 an hour, someone parks for 5 minutes, they need to pay only for 5 minutes.
Yeah, which makes sense. So those that don't know me, I've actually collected over 120,000 data points on myself over the last 13 years. It's roughly 20 pieces of data per day. I am the world's laziest artist. I'm producing the most expensive art piece in the world. And essentially what I'm doing with that data is I'm, every interaction that I have, say with friends, for example, I'm pulling out 20 data inputs beforehand, the time of the event, and 20 data points afterwards. So I know, like, for example, all my consumption in regards to every coffee I've had for 13 years, what type, where it is, what the time of it was. I've got the date, obviously. I've got GPS coordinates, and then I've got weather data. And from that, what I can do is actually produce a piece of artwork, a unique piece of artwork that's based on the data set to create generated art, and then give that to my friends, family, as a piece of NFT art. And that becomes an object that is then consumable and tradable on blockchain technology. Additionally to that, I'm founder and CTO of Konversed, and we're a minting house for NFTs. Essentially, we created a system where we can automate application builds for iOS and Android to the store. So essentially what we can do is print economies in literally minutes. We're working with pro athletes and pro coaches around the world in regards to doing knowledge NFTs and having it also on the blockchain so that knowledge can actually be used and people can have ownership of their knowledge in perpetuity so that they can actually, so we have, for example, Sasha Bajin. He's the former hitting partner for Serena Williams, and he's a partner with us in ONEPRO tennis. And basically with this, it means that Sasha's kids, his grandkids' kids could all benefit from Sasha's intellectual property in regards to his knowledge. And so that gives you a little bit of a background about what each of us do. In regards to that, I might get Sean to basically explain a little bit more about, well, we can just discuss about data collection in general by big tech, because this is actually a really interesting point. You know, so if you look at, for example, how Facebook and Google actually harvest data, if you look at it from, say, my perspective, a lot of the time they say it's free, right? Or you're clicking into terms and conditions that are so built that you don't have any transparency about what the data is used for. And this is actually a bit of a problem. Even say on Facebook, for example, if you break a leg and you turn off everything in regards to, I don't want to be tagged, I'm not going to post anything, I don't want anything collected on me. You've still got friends tagging you in photos. You've got someone writing you a comment to say, hey, Matt, you broke your leg. Or, Matt, I heard you're sick, what happened? Even if you don't respond, you've got other people that are actually creating the data around you as an individual, even though you don't want that data known. And that's a big issue, like with medical data, etc., privacy. And that's one part that I see is a big problem with big tech, where it's not transparent enough in regards to the collection of data, right? Do you guys have any other use cases in regards to, what are your thoughts on that, Subra?
Yeah. There are like, you know, if you want to capture an individual's PII, that's personally identifiable information, as well as his possible behavioral data, then there is a lot of play that comes in where privacy has to be controlled, and then, you know, the sharing of the data has to be limited to what the user decides to share. One thing we need to realize is the user owns the data. Today, the current scenario is, if, for example, when you share information with banks or say Amazons of the world or even Netflix of the world, they are capturing your data and they are storing the data, and they are actually harvesting the data without your consent, I would say, or even without your knowledge. Often you don't even know what data has been shared and with whom, which can be quite, I would say, detrimental from a privacy perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So today, if we can turn that around and move it to a point, say on a DLT, like what on a DLT, where you store user data on the DLT, and with open data systems, you have the user's consent to share the data for a given purpose. The user owns the data, and the user decides what data is shared and how it is shared and for what purpose it is shared. Again, I just come back to the example that we were discussing earlier. Supposing someone has to go and buy, say, liquor in the US, they need to prove that they are above the age of 21. Today, they would give out their say driving license or a passport or any other form of identity or the SSN card, which would also contain other pieces of information like his address or maybe his email or his phone number and what have you. Now, very often the liquor store may take a photocopy of that and store it. All they need to know is you're above 21 or not. If they are storing your entire card or say a driving license, you do not have any control on where the data is going and what is the purpose, what other purposes is it being used for. You do not control anything once it has crossed the line. And which can be a security threat, a privacy threat at some point in time. There have been enough cases that have been reported, many more cases not reported. Yeah. So in such cases, when you have open data and all you need to say, share a photograph of yours and validation that you're above 21 or below 21 is all that is required. In such cases, we can, data systems are already available, which can protect someone's privacy.
Yeah. Well, I look at it like, say, with Amazon Alexa, I've got friends that have, like, say, 4 Alexas at home, right? Yeah. And they invite me over. I go over there to dinner. And I don't know that they've got Alexa. Actually, I do. But every time you go in there, you know that their Alexa is actually recording you. Now, I haven't signed up to that. Like, they have agreed to those terms and conditions from Amazon. I haven't. But when I go in there, if they don't tell me, if they're not explicit in regards to that, and unfortunately, a lot of the information that is presented to them, they don't realize how much of that data is actually used against them or, to find certain things. Well, one thing that really freaks me out is if you're having a conversation, it could be a private conversation with a friend, for example, and then all of a sudden in your YouTube, even if you're not logged in, the stuff that you talked about is actually coming up in the feed.
Correct.
This creeps me out massively. I'm just like, you sit there and go, hang on a second, I didn't search for this. Actually, my friend talked about it, and now it's coming up. Okay, what's happening here, right? And I think that's where some of it is actually quite creepy, And it's same with my data, for example. Subu, just on a separate point, which hotel are you staying in? Which hotel are you staying in?
I lost you.
Which hotel are you staying in?
I'm staying in a hotel in Dera.
What room number? What room number?
414.
He's open with his data. That's great. Yeah, they do, don't they? Yeah.
So
The funny thing is, they asked Zuckerberg in Congress the same question, and he wouldn't answer it. But the interesting thing is that Facebook, Google, all the big tech companies track you, right?
Correct.
So they already know. And the thing is that data is actually of value. If you know the footprint of everybody and you can control the map system, you would know the footprint of someone going into a particular restaurant at a particular time, the frequency of traffic, and whether or not people go to certain restaurants. You could actually, from that piece of information alone, start a very successful chain of restaurants that specialize in this type of cuisine. In these streets, because you already know, that's where everybody goes. So the big data that is collected on everybody is actually of value. Economic value, and I don't think people realize exactly how much value that is,
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that just came to mind, and even some of the roads are collecting data.
Yes, right.
Within, there's data collection capabilities in the roads.
Correct. When your vehicle goes over the sensor plate.
Yes.
Right, correct.
So
traffic flow.
I didn't sign up for that.
No.
No.
Did your car sign up for that? Was it a Tesla?
No. No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a constant.
It's a constant battle. It really is. There's, is it Clearview or Clearwater? They're an AI company in the UK that were actually doing scanning and scraping of the internet. And they're using basically AI to work out basically facial recognition with biometrics. So working out the AI with the distance between the eyes and the nose and the eyebrows and stuff like that. But they scanned the whole internet for that. And then they tried to flog that data to government agencies in order for like border security. And the Australian government actually turned around and said, well, how you harvested that data was actually illegal because you weren't transparent in how you collected it and you didn't tell people what you used for. And I think that's one of the biggest topics right now in regards to big data is I've agreed to these terms and conditions and maybe, okay, in the contract you've said you can use it for these purposes, right? Now, if I'm aware that you can use it for those purposes, what stops you from using it 10 years down the track because an engineer's gone, you know what? We have all this data sitting on the shelf. How about we do this with it, right? So if you look at, say, the book scanning that Google did, well, that's actually really interesting. They scanned, like, say, the 10,000 books, and they did the OCR on it, right? And after that, they actually got sued by the publishers because they were scanning all the books, right? And they paid the fine because they can, right? Anybody else that did that probably couldn't pay the fine.
Yeah.
But now you've got artificial intelligence out there that can write an email with predictive text better than most people.
Chat GPT.
And so the question is, who owns that AI?
Yeah.
Is it the writers? Because if it comes down to liability, we're starting to get into a really interesting topic. You know?
Yeah. I think we're going to be seeing many more such applications or scenarios come up with, I guess, AI and what else we have, whatever ecosystems that we are seeing in 4IR. Interesting times ahead, but obviously it's a data play, and the privacy, user privacy will always be in question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, Sean, in regards to law enforcement perspectives and the end goal, can you tell us a little bit about data collection?
So from a law enforcement perspective, so understand that there's a malicious event that had to deal with data exfiltration by someone who wants to use it for malicious purposes or to insert that into the hacker's world ecosystem for sale, if you will. What, from a law enforcement perspective, so as we talked about earlier, the two hats. Put the hat on of law enforcement and says, hey, we want to take all the information we have that we've collected on those conversations, those digital conversations that led to the exfiltration of said data, and I want to find out who that individual is. Now, from a pure law enforcement creed, you're limited in addressing a personal identity from a perspective. But if I happen to be intelligence, a level above, who's going to stop me? How do you even know I have access to that, to get that? Now, from a law enforcement perspective, I want to get that person who did that. From a global citizen, I'm saying, hey, wait a minute. You have my personal identity. You have access to me, or even though I didn't do that, but you could do that to me.
Yep.
And maybe you could, well, I don't even want to go down that other path, but
Well,
yeah.
It's also interesting too, who defines malicious activity?
Yes.
And is it transparent about who actually is the person that says, you know what, that is malicious activity? And who are they? Like, who's checking the security guard?
Yes.
You know? And I suppose when you look at it, you go, well, okay, it's apparently malicious activity. What deems it as malicious activity? Who's actually making that decision? Who owns the company that's collecting all the data to give out, right? And I understand on 2 points of view, like you've got like the CEOs of the company, for example, that are basically doing this on behalf of government. They don't want to be known because they don't want to be compromised, right? But on the other side, you've got, you know, people that are like, hang on a second, who's actually checking my data, right? Why has my piece of information been used, you know, or been flagged as malicious, right? And so these are really interesting parts in regards to the equation.
Yes, some of these that we've never had to address before.
Correct.
You know, just what he was saying is we're evolving in technology.
Exactly.
We're learning this on the fly.
Yeah, well, interesting, in Berlin last week, they were saying that the 25 people basically were talking over Telegram, and police basically arrested them because of a government takeover, and that was just on German national television, right? So they were actually using the conversations from Telegram to actually basically enforce law.
Yeah, it's interesting for them to go back to an analog version of communication because
Correct.
from a digital perspective now, we have learned and evolved how to track that.
Yes.
When initially, when they moved from analog to digital, we didn't know how to do that.
Right.
So from a data privacy perspective.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. It crosses over a lot of different borders.
One of the issues that has been there in that space is, unfortunately, or I would say just the ecosystem is such that the technology leads the policy making.
Yep.
And which is why I would say once technology evolves much faster than any governmental policy making or definition of laws or rules in this case, and they're often lagging in almost all parts of the world. I guess if policymakers can get into their act and therefore come up to speed on this, maybe some of the issues will get resolved before matter hits the roof.
Correct. It's like a sandbox,
Yes.
You've got a situation where you've got all these different technology toys, IoT devices connected to microphones, cameras, and then
Smart
the kids,
TVs.
and smart TVs, and the kids can play in this little sandbox and push the limits and the borders and the boundaries. Then they start hitting each other.
Just to give you an idea, as of this moment, we've had smartphones now for almost 15 years.
Wow.
We still don't have regulation on what data is being collected, how
From the
is it
smartphone.
stored on just our smartphone. Simple example is almost every app asks you permission to read your SMS. That means
That's
they're reading
correct.
your OTPs, they're reading your bank transactions, they're reading what you're purchasing,
Yep.
everything.
Correct. And I think too, one of the biggest problems is that a lot of people are naive in regards to what and how data can be used against them. There was a guy in New York many years ago, and I know because I'm doing the self collection of data. There was a guy in New York that got framed for a crime, and he wasn't actually collecting data on himself at the time, right? But he got framed for a crime he didn't commit. He got locked up for 3 or 4 years. He got let out, and then every half an hour he took a photo with his cell phone to record where he was, because he was so scared that he'd get locked up and framed again, right? I guarantee you back then they had the information from the cell towers anywhere, but he just didn't have the right people. I know a guy that can have access to that. No, can you help me? Sure. You could have really helped him out.
No comment.
Yeah, so in regards to if there is a breach and how can a person's data be protected? So, Subin, can you weigh in on that? If there is a breach with data, how can a person's data be protected?
Okay. The breach itself, the issue there is that if you're lucky, there are at least 7 or 8 instances of your data spread all over the world. That can be in North Korea and Russia and the US itself, Israel, maybe China, of course. And if you're really unlucky, it can also be in Iran. Now, how do you manage your data having 7 copies, and what is it being used for is a $1 million question, or maybe $1 billion question. How do you overcome this is that one of the bigger challenges we have is almost every data store that we have, all the PII information at this point of time are in centralized systems, which means there's a single point of breach that is required. And you must have been reading for the last, I would say, 15, 20 years, so many data breaches happening right from Yahoo to Equifax to all systems being hacked, including, Ashley, what was that? Including dating sites and stuff like that. Recently, I think some of the crypto exchanges also have been breached, which means a lot of data is getting compromised of individuals, their transactions, their behaviors, so on and so forth. The possible and only solution that can come up in this scenario is that we decentralize the data. Each individual holds his own data, owns his own data, and stores it in his private environment, maybe on his device or maybe in a private cloud, which means that if you're looking at 8 billion people today, there would be 8 billion data stores, and there's not a centralized system, so you do not have a single point of breach.
Right.
That's one way to do it.
Right. Sean, can you weigh in on that one as well in regards to the breach and how a person's data can be protected from your perspective? Not really. It walks that line, doesn't it?
No, yeah. Unfortunately, as Subbu was saying, is ultimately all of our information is out there anyway, from other sources, if not from ourselves.
Right.
From breaches. Often when I speak, sometimes I'll say, you know, Department of Motor Vehicles has got a letter from them, who's got a letter from Home Depot, who's got a letter from Equifax. Maybe you're single, you got a letter from Ashley Madison.
Exactly.
Hopefully you were single. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's hard to say how you protect that when I don't have control over their environments.
Correct.
My information is there. They were exploited, and now it's out there. So, yeah.
So what level of data walks the privacy line with law enforcement?
Good question. As I referenced earlier, ultimately, we all, in scenarios of law enforcement and obvious exposure of people's information from this perspective, you want to get the perpetrator. But law enforcement levels at the police level and below the intelligence level have limitations. Right. For us from a consumer and a public citizen perspective. But at the same time, I do want to get some resolution. We want to remediate that. Maybe we can stop someone else from being affected if we can get some of that information, but that's where you have to walk that line from a data privacy perspective to have access to that information. And that no matter what country you go to, and I know there's certain levels, there's levels to that data privacy depending on the country you're in.
Correct.
Of what they have access to. So it's a tough equation. Do you want more information to be available? No. About me? No. But if you are the bad guy, yes, I want you.
Right.
So that's the line you have to walk. But yeah, it's tough.
It's actually very interesting because like even with AI and how it's all collecting our data as well, and they're making decisions. AI is actually making decisions for people, right? And depending on where they actually get their resources from and harvest their data from, depends on how the AI interprets that, right? And how it delivers a message. So I know with like Alexa, for example, there was a 4-year-old that turned around and said, "Hey Alexa, does a penny fit into a toaster?" Well, a penny technically does fit into a toaster, but if a little girl of 4 was to put a penny in a toaster, well, that could be a problem, right? So it's how that data is collected and how it's used and how it's interpreted, and it's like right now, I feel like it's a bit like the Wild Wild West, you know, with data collection. You know, you got the toys in the sandpit, we've got these technology toys. They're all sitting there, everyone's playing, they're hitting each other with them, and now we're looking in the sandpit and going, well, it's not so good. We need to take this toy away. You know, we need to regulate this one. You know, we need to make this one more transparent. And I think that's the point in technology where we are now in regards to big data and, you know, what gets collected on us, making sure that there's like some transparency around the data. And if the data with its intended purpose changes, meaning, you know, you've got it for this specific use case, and now we're going to change the rules and invent something over here, then, you know, we basically either get updated, informed, and having it transparent, similar to what GDPR is attempting to do in Europe right now. You know, I think like with GDPR, it's quite interesting in the tech space because they've been forced to do it on a certain time frame, for example, and a lot of small to medium businesses were pretty affected by that because they couldn't actually meet the rollout plan, you know, in regards to conforming to data privacy in regards to GDPR. The big tech companies can, and some of them don't want to. They'd rather just be like, you know what, we'll just pay the fine. You know, so I find this aspect really quite interesting. And another thing recently with Elon Musk, for example, you know, he's obviously just bought Twitter. You know, now he's just opened everyone's accounts. But the interesting thing is he's turned around and said, oh, hang on a second, OpenAI, they've been scraping our data to use it for their chatbot, conversational AI.
Correct.
Right? And so the thing is that that's on Twitter's platform. That's their content. It's similar to my stats. I have my application. I'm recording personal statistics. I'm putting it in there. No one has access to that because I'm doing artwork. It's going to be the most expensive artwork in the world. So with Twitter, I find it quite interesting with Elon Musk saying, you know what, we're going to rein that back in. Now, that's our intellectual property and our users' intellectual property. And we're going to develop a model around this, to a business model to actually have it so it can contribute to OpenAI, but with a cost, right? And I think also with blockchain technology, even now, we can put in systems where any type of chat system, like even the book scanning that I mentioned, you know how many pages you scanned? Yeah. From which book? You know which publisher is actually being used. That AI has a value to it in regards to each book and its contribution. And I find the book scanning one quite interesting because if, for example, you go to the library, right? Mm-hmm. So you can go to the library and free, like it can be free, you can pay for a library book, right? Or like to actually rent it, right? And transact that way. So even if you go to a library, there is still a transaction. The library's purchased the book to begin with, right? Purchased several of them, right? So there's always a transaction fee, right? But with just scanning the books and having people's intellectual property, I question it and say, who actually owns the conversational AI that is being generated right now? Because that's actually written off the backs of a lot of different authors and writers out on the planet. And the interesting thing is, and if you look at, say, OpenAI, the middle class, for example, and the script writers and stuff like that is actually being affected by OpenAI. Just yesterday, we were playing around with OpenAI, and you can write press releases really quickly. It's incredible. Like, I was a bit shocked with how much came out in this press release. Please write me a press release on this. And it just spits it out. That is incredible, right? And so I can see why there is a disruption like 2023 in regards to conversational AI and this, and with big data. That's going to be a very hot topic, you know?
Absolutely.
And it does come down to ownership, like who does own it, right? If you do own it, right, and you own the data, like as in OpenAI owns the data, right? Do they also say, I'll put my hand up for any injury that has occurred because a girl put a penny in a toaster?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Like, where do they draw the line?
Yeah, that's one aspect. The other issue that has happened is not just breach of data, but also denial of data. Mm-hmm. There was just last week in India, we had an issue with the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which is the biggest hospital in Delhi. It's a government-owned hospital, and we had an issue with, I think, some Chinese hackers blocked out all the servers.
Right.
And for about 10 days, the servers weren't accessible to the hospital itself, and they were demanding 30 bitcoins.
Oh, right.
And
holding them ransom.
Yeah, holding them at ransom, and the entire hospital had to go offline and work on paper and pencil with all the medical records of the patients on the servers not accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that almost leads us into a different subject matter around data privacy in the healthcare vertical, but I'll leave that for another discussion.
Yeah.
But that's another aspect of...
That's a huge aspect.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. If you get your blood sample done, who's got that data in their system and where's it go?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
I've often wondered. I used to donate tromazides to cancer patients, actually, and I'd get the whole, because it's for my stats, right? So I'd get this huge like printout of all the blood samples. And I often wondered, you know, I'm going to collect this for my stats, right? But they also have access to it. And what are they going to do with it? And I don't sign anything in regards to, you know, that they get to use it for other purposes, right?
And or their vulnerability.
Exactly.
Which is a common issue globally in the healthcare vertical.
Yep. Well, in cases like that too, you've got like, say, organ harvesting. You know the person with the blood type. You know that they're there. You know, thanks.
So
you know, that's where data can be used against you. You know,
absolutely.
The military hospitals.
Right.
Damage your military.
Yep.
From an attacker. Yes. So it's sorry to be the boogeyman.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, Super, you wanted to talk also about open data.
Yeah.
as well. Can you touch a little bit on that subject?
So I think open data and DLTs will go hand in hand in the near future. DLTs will provide the decentralization of data where the user has control on the data and he can, and is stored with the data, all his private information, all his records, all his activities can be stored privately on a decentralized system. And coming to open data, whenever he wishes to share that data or any requester asks him for that particular data, it can be his health records, education records, banking and finance, so on and so forth. You have a immutable record of his consent being given for that particular purpose, and that requester using it only for that particular purpose, and for which there is a audit trail, so to say, set up, which can be recorded on a DLT platform.
Yeah.
Such applications is where we can ensure data privacy of individuals or personal businesses, so to say, while not just data privacy, but also security of the data against what we have been seeing as hacks or data breaches over the last, I would say, 20, 30 years.
I think it's good too. Like if you have, like, say, centralized systems, say for passports, for example, right?
Yeah.
There's no need right now to have an actual physical passport, in my opinion. You know, because all the governments can work together. You've got the biometric scans. You've got enough AI in, you know, surveillance cameras to actually work out that you are who you say you are. There's retina scans, etc. In fact, in that regard, you've got like more data privacy issues in regards to the person that's handling your passport, right?
Absolutely. So open data in that sense will be quite revolutionary because you're giving the permission to access that data only into the owner's hands, in the sense the individual will own his data. It's not Amazon or Netflix or a bank which owns the data and they use it in whichever way. In this case, they would have to access the data only with the consent of the user and define the purpose. So if the user wishes to monetize, he can monetize it.
That's
as we
great.
were discussing, like if he wishes to say, for example, with your systems that you have been building, say you have now 13 years of data of where all you had coffee and what type of coffee, right? And if you wish to monetize that, you can go to Nestle and tell them these are my flavors of coffee and this is what I like.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's the way I
Or to
envisage it
Starbucks.
as well. You can create
Starbucks.
APIs, you know, into the blockchain and allow universities and different levels of engineers and data scientists to basically mine that data and do query strings against it and have a data set that's just a little bit more unique, you know, just to test their brains a little bit. You know?
Absolutely. You can add an AI layer on top of, say, a DLT, which will then, you know, help, say, Matt share his coffee tastes and flavors and his preferences, say, with Starbucks or Costa Coffee.
That's not
or with Nestle.
organic coffee.
Yeah.
Don't go decaf. Terrible.
So you decide with whom you want to share what data, and then if you want to personalize services against that for yourselves, you can. You don't want to share the data, that right now lies with you.
Yep.
And that's the differentiator that we'll see in the years to come.
I think so too.
Especially with the 4IR happening as we go forward.
Right. I agree. Are there any questions? Yes. I was certain there would be some questions. Yes. Sean, incoming. I should sit away from you. No.
Hi, Gaurav this side from InterContinental, India. First of all, thanks for the great discussion, one of the great discussion I have ever heard of on the data privacy. My question is around the, I see a clear gap when we are relying on the policy makers to design a policy around the data privacy. And every day I'm seeing the technologies accelerating, whereas policy makers are still, I would say, very slow and works on a constant speed. And as per technology, there every other day we have a new loophole around the usage of the data privacy. Do you see that this gap is filling up in any near future?
If I have to go by history, if I go by the precedent, which may not be an indicator of the future, we have seen this gap happen in the last 27 years since internet came, and that gap's only growing. I don't see that change very soon, personally.
I mean, security by its nature has references to healthcare, viruses, and other things. And typically with healthcare, we can't solve the virus until it happens. We can test it, figure out how then to stop it. So I think we'll always be in arrears with that, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Hi, this is Anubhav from Bangalore, India. My question is that suppose I register somewhere my email ID and my personal identifiable information on some platform and there is a data breach. After that, is there any way for first of all to know that my data has been breached or not? And if it has been breached, whether as a personal, from a personal point of view, can I do something about it? Because there are some sites like, have I been pawned or something like that, but are they reliable enough? That is the question.
I know. Well, I think that depends on the country. So I know within the U.S., typically there really isn't any recourse for you as a subscriber, if you will, or user of that platform. Typically, they have schedules set up and a process through their PR departments of how to respond publicly after something happens. Because now it's not if, it's when it's going to happen. So, yeah.
And if they know about it.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too.
Yeah.
You know, if they know about it, sure, they've got the setup of the PR, like you said, and be able to roll that workflow out, you know, and address it and say, look, I'm sorry, there has been data breach. Please update your username and password. I know Adobe had the same issue not so long ago, but a couple of years ago. But I think that comes down to cyber too, you know, like from a user perspective, like a user can also be that link, you know, if you have a password that's not properly protected.
I mean, you see that often with the responses with, I'll give you, well, in the US, I'll give you access to credit counseling. What is that? It's not stopping anything.
The only remedial action I saw from one site was that please change your password. That's the best they could do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there is no recourse typically.
No.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. Firstly, I'm not a tech person, so just a very basic question that I want to, probably understand. I don't understand the technical terms, but back in India, I have my friends, so, we have this thing, right, that someone is always listening to us through the microphone of the mobile, or someone is always watching us through the camera. So firstly, is it true? And if yes, if we sort of turn off the settings and stop giving the access to it, does it really work? Because, I've seen that we're somehow talking about astrology, and then out of nowhere, this astrology app that I have just pops up giving me an update that, we have an update for your sign, so on and so forth. So that's something that I just want to understand, maybe.
Well,
I was always taught that, and now with phones, whether it's a landline phone, mobile phone, microphone, if there's a microphone there, assume it's on.
Always.
yeah. Don't say anything that you wouldn't say to your grandma anywhere.
So just to give you an idea, when you say OK Google or Hey Alexa, don't you think it's always monitoring you? It's waiting for you to say that, which also means it's hearing everything else you say.
But then what we did was we sort of went to the settings and deliberately turned off all the access. But does it really work? Or, is it still listening?
I personally don't think it always works. Like I did the same sort of things because I'm aware of that problem. And for me, even though I did turn off all the microphone settings, even in YouTube, for example, as I said, I talk and it comes up in my feed. And the thing is, every device actually has a unique frequency to it. It's not just a unique identifier, it's a unique frequency. Now, I was at Ars Electronica in Linz, it's the largest digital arts festival in Europe, super cool conference to go to, in regards to technology and art, right? So they sort of they bridge this gap between this is really cool technology, we're gonna wrap it in art, but when you take the art cover off, you're like, wow, that can really be used for some crazy things, right? They had a stall set up and they had people's phones and it actually showed how TVs and the smartphone basically can communicate. So you've got a unique identifier as a vibration on my phone, on Sean's phone, on Subu's phone. And if we're sitting near a smart TV, that smart TV understands that this unique identifier has us three sitting in front of it. And that freaked me out. And I was just like, that's super interesting. Now, they were disguising that as targeted advertising, right? But that's actually tracking people. But it's also tracking association as well, right? And I just find that really quite interesting because, you know, that's not very transparent, right? But how the engineers had set this up, it was actually really quite interesting because it actually picked up the vibration as a unique frequency. So
A much simpler example is, say you're watching a movie on Netflix and you leave it halfway. How do you get an alert on your phone?
Yeah. And imagine maybe you have a Samsung phone and you have a Samsung television, and you want to look at YouTube. You've turned off all your notifications, but how does that phone ask you to cast to that TV?
correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It knows which devices are around.
It tells you exactly
Tells you exactly.
what model it is.
Yep. What time you're accessing it, what you're watching.
So on the other side, while there are these privacy aspects, it also is I would say, integrated digital lifestyle that is evolving as we go. As we just discussed, the policies are not yet in place, but the lifestyle's already moved ahead. And hopefully sometime the lawmakers will wake up and put the systems in place.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's interesting though, the lobbyists are on both sides.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep. Yep.
Thank you. Any more questions? Fantastic. I think that's the end of it. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank
you
you.
so much. A round of applause for these gentlemen. Very, very interesting discussion. Now, day 2 of our Internet 2.0 conference has come to an end, ladies and gentlemen. It was a lovely day of interactions. Lovely, thank you. Thank you. We have one more day to go tomorrow, day 3 of more learning and more interactions, and looking forward to seeing all of you there tomorrow. You can head outside to the promenade for some snacks and mingling, and I'm Nashpreet. I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for being lovely.